The great chamber of the Galactic Conclave was older than most civilizations. Its walls were made of crystal that had been harvested from dying stars. Its floor was carved from the bones of ancient worlds. Representatives from 1,000 different species sat in their designated places, their bodies ranging from small and delicate to massive and terrifying. They had gathered here for centuries to discuss trade, borders, and the endless politics of a galaxy that held more life than anyone could count. Today, however, the chamber was silent. All eyes were fixed on the raised platform at the center, where the delegation of the Vorath Dominion stood, tall and proud. The Vorath were insectoid creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall on 6 powerful legs. Their exoskeletons gleamed like polished obsidian, and their compound eyes reflected the light of 100 floating orbs. They had conquered over 200 species in their long history. Their empire stretched across an entire arm of the galaxy. When the Vorath spoke, others listened. Executor Calvin stepped forward. He was the supreme military commander of the Dominion, a position earned through blood and victory. His voice resonated through the chamber like thunder rolling across an empty plain. The Dominion has identified a new territory for expansion, he announced. The system designated Sol, and all human colonies connected to it. We will begin operations within one standard cycle. This is not a request for permission. This is a notification. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. The humans were relatively new to the galactic stage. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago. Their technology was primitive compared to the elder races. Their military was small. Their territory was limited to a handful of worlds. Most delegates simply nodded or looked away. The Vorath had done this many times before. There was no point in objecting. The humans would surrender or die, and life would continue as it always had. But then an old voice cut through the whispers. I would advise against this action. Every head turned toward the speaker. He was a Solari, one of the oldest and most respected species in the Conclave. His name was Ambassador Torvan, and he had served in this chamber for over 300 years. His scales had faded from bright blue to pale silver with age. His movements were slow and careful, but his eyes were sharp, and his voice carried the weight of long experience. Executor Colvin turned his massive head toward the old ambassador. His mandibles clicked with something that might have been amusement. You advise against it? Calvin repeated. On what grounds? The humans are weak. Their fleet is insignificant. Their worlds are poorly defended. This conquest will take less than a single rotation of their planet. Torvin rose from his seat. It took him several moments, and his attendants moved to help him, but he waved them away. When he finally stood, he looked directly at the executor with eyes that had seen more than most beings could imagine. 212 years ago, Torvin began, my people made the same mistake you are about to make. The chamber fell completely silent. The Solari rarely spoke of their past conflicts. They were known as a peaceful species now, focused on diplomacy and trade. But Torvin was old enough to remember a different time. We discovered a human colony on a world we called Aurelia 7, he continued. It was a small settlement, perhaps 12,000 humans in total. They had farms, a few factories, some basic defenses. Nothing that concerned us. We sent a fleet of 2 million soldiers to claim the world and add it to our territory. Torvin paused, and something dark passed across his ancient face. The siege lasted 11 years. A wave of disbelief swept through the chamber. Delegates exchanged confused looks. 11 years to conquer 12,000 primitives? It seemed impossible. We destroyed their ships in the first week, Torvan said. We cut off all communication with their homeworld. We surrounded them completely. There was no hope of rescue, no possibility of victory. By every logical measure, they should have surrendered. We offered them fair terms. We promised to spare their lives and integrate them into our society. It was a generous offer. His voice grew quieter, and the delegates leaned forward to hear. They refused. Not just once, but every single time. We offered surrender terms 147 times over those 11 years. They rejected every one, and they kept fighting. Torvan's claws gripped the railing in front of him. They turned every building into a fortress. They dug tunnels beneath our feet and attacked us from below. They used farming equipment as weapons. They poisoned their own water supplies rather than let us use them. When we captured their leaders, new leaders appeared the next day. When we destroyed their weapons, they made new ones from scraps. Children carried messages between resistant cells. The elderly built bombs. The wounded kept fighting from their beds. He looked at Calvin with an expression that held no anger, only sadness. We lost 400,000 soldiers taking that colony. 400,000 of our finest warriors against 12,000 farmers and engineers. And when we finally broke through their last defenses, do you know what we found? No one spoke. We found humans still fighting. Grandparents with makeshift spears. Children throwing rocks. Wounded soldiers firing their last shots. They knew they were going to die. They had known for years. But they would not stop. They could not stop. It was not in their nature. Torvin slowly sat back down, exhaustion visible in every movement. We won nothing that day, he said softly. We inherited ashes and corpses. And we made an enemy that would never forget what we had done. For decades afterward, human ships hunted ours. Human agents sabotaged our stations. Human assassins killed our leaders. Not because their government ordered it, but because individual humans had made it their personal mission to make us pay. He looked around the chamber at the silent delegates. He eventually made peace with them. It cost us dearly. And I tell you now from personal experience what we learned from that terrible war. His eyes fixed on Executor Calvin. You cannot conquer humans. You can kill them. You can destroy their worlds. You can burn everything they have built. But you cannot make them surrender. It is not a choice they make. It is who they are. They would rather die standing than live on their knees. And if you try to force them down, they will make you pay a price so high that victory becomes meaningless. Calvin stood motionless for a long moment. Then his mandibles clicked again, and this time there was no amusement in the sound. The Solari were weak, he said dismissively. The Varath are not. We have crushed species far more dangerous than humans. Your failure does not concern me. Torvin nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. Then I will say only this, he replied. Remember my words when you are standing in the ashes of your own empire, wondering where everything went wrong. The humans have a saying that I learned long ago. They say that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. He settled back into his seat and closed his eyes. I have given my warning. What you do with it is your own choice. Calvin turned away without another word. The Vareth delegation departed the chamber, their steps echoing against the ancient floor. The war would begin soon, and the galaxy would learn what humanity truly was. The Wraith Armada emerged from hyperspace, like a swarm of locusts descending upon a field of grain. 3,000 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack a planet in half. Behind them came the troop transports, carrying millions of soldiers ready to claim their new territory. Executor Calvin stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, watching the human colony world grow larger on his view screen. They called it New Helsinki. It was a cold world, covered in forests and snow, home to approximately 2 million humans. His intelligence officers had provided detailed reports. The colony had a small defense force, perhaps a dozen outdated ships and a few ground batteries. Nothing that would last more than an hour against his fleet. This would be easy. This would be quick. And when it was over, the rest of humanity would see what happened to those who stood in the way of the Dominion. He opened a communication channel to the planet below. This is Executor Calvin of the Wraith Dominion, he announced. Your world now belongs to us. You have one planetary rotation to surrender unconditionally. All military forces will lay down their weapons. All government officials will report for processing. Resistance will be met with complete destruction. This is your only warning. He closed the channel and waited. His previous conquests had taught him that most species needed a few hours to accept their fate. There would be panic, arguments, perhaps some futile attempts at negotiation. Then the surrender would come, and his soldiers would begin the occupation. But something strange began happening, almost immediately. His communication officers reported an explosion of activity across human networks. Messages were flying between Earth and every colony at speeds that suggested they had been preparing for this moment. Factories that had been producing civilian goods suddenly went dark, and when their signals returned, they were outputting military equipment. Transport ships changed course, not away from the danger, but toward it. Colvin watched this with growing confusion. Were they really going to fight? Against 3,000 warships? It made no tactical sense. Then the response came from New Helsinki. Governor Elena Vasquez appeared on his view screen. She was a human female of middle age, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines on her face that spoke of hard years. She sat behind a simple desk, her hands folded calmly in front of her. Behind her, Colvin could see people moving quickly, preparing for something. "Executor Colvin," she said, and her voice was steady as stone. "I have received your message and shared it with my people. We have discussed your terms and reached a decision." She leaned forward slightly, and there was something in her eyes that Colvin had never seen before in a conquered species. It was not fear. It was not desperation. It was something cold and hard and absolutely certain. "Come and take it," she said. The transmission ended. Kelvin stared at the blank screen for several seconds. His officers exchanged uncertain looks. This was not how it was supposed to happen. Species surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. It was the logical thing to do, but the humans were already moving, their small fleet. Those dozen outdated ships did not flee or hide. They advanced directly toward the Varath Armada, weapons charging. Ground batteries on New Helsinki powered up and began targeting the nearest Varath vessels. And across the planet, every civilian shelter was being converted into a defensive position. Calvin gave the order to attack. The battle lasted 3 hours. The human fleet was destroyed, just as expected. Their ships were slower, weaker, and hopelessly outnumbered. But they did not retreat, not even when they were the last ship remaining. They fought until their reactors went critical and took 2 Varath cruisers with them. When the ground assault began, Calvin expected the real surrender to come. Surely the colonists would see reason now. Their fleet was gone. Their world was surrounded. There was no hope left. Instead, found himself facing something he had never encountered before. The humans had rigged everything. Buildings collapsed on advancing troops. Roads exploded under heavy vehicles. Tunnels that his sensors had not detected allowed defenders to appear behind his lines and vanish again before they could be caught. Every factory, every power station, every communication hub was booby-trapped. If the Virath wanted something, they would have to fight for it. And they would pay in blood for every meter. The colonists fought with whatever they had. Soldiers used military weapons. Civilians used hunting rifles, kitchen knives, farming tools, rocks. Children as young as 10 carried messages and supplies through tunnels, too small for Varath soldiers to follow. Old men and women, who could barely walk, manned communication stations and coordinated attacks. They did not fight like a military. They fought like something else, something that Calvin had no name for. Every person was a soldier. Every building was a fortress. Every shadow hid a threat. After 2 weeks, New Helsinki was still not conquered. Reports began arriving from other fronts. The Varath had struck 7 human colonies simultaneously, expecting quick victories everywhere. They had achieved none. Every colony was fighting. Every single one. Not just the military, but everyone. Even colonies that had been given 24 hours to surrender had used that time to prepare their defenses instead. An intelligence officer brought Calvin a troubling report. He had been analyzing captured human communications and interviewing prisoners. What he had found did not make sense. "They're not fighting to win, Executor," the officer said, his voice uncertain. "They know they cannot win. Their own communications acknowledge this. They are fighting to make us pay. They want this war to cost us so much that we will eventually decide it is not worth continuing." Calvin stared at him. "That is suicide." "Yes, Executor. They know this. They do not care." The officer hesitated, then continued. I interrogated a captured human soldier. I asked him why they did not surrender when they had no hope. He told me something I did not understand. He said that hope was not the point. He said that even if every human died in this war, they would die free. And he said that humans had a long memory. He said that if we killed them all, their ghosts would haunt us forever. Calvin dismissed the officer and sat alone in his command chamber. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Conclave watched the war with growing amazement. The Verith were the greatest military power in known space. They had never lost a war. And yet here they were, bogged down on a handful of primitive worlds. Losing soldiers by the thousands to an enemy that should have fallen in days, Ambassador Torvin watched the reports from his chambers and felt no satisfaction. He had tried to warn them. Now they would learn the lesson that his own people had learned 2 centuries ago. Humans did not surrender. It was not a strategy. It was not a choice. It was simply who they were, and the Virath had just woken up a species that would never stop fighting until one side or the other was completely destroyed. On New Helsinki, Governor Alina Vasquez stood in an underground bunker surrounded by her remaining commanders. Half the colony was in ruins. Thousands were dead. There was no help coming. She looked at the faces around her, saw the exhaustion and the fear and the pain. They think we will break, she said quietly. They think if they kill enough of us, the rest will give up. They do not understand us. She straightened her shoulders. We hold the line. We make them pay for every inch. And when our children look back at this moment, they will know that we did not kneel. The commanders nodded, and they went back to war. 6 months had passed since the war began. The Virath Dominion had officially conquered 7 human worlds. Their flags flew over the Capitol buildings. Their soldiers walked the streets. Their commanders sent reports of victory to the homeworld, but the reports were lies. Everyone knew it. The Veroth controlled nothing. Every night brought new attacks. Every day brought new problems. The human resistance had not weakened with time. It had grown stronger, more organized, more deadly. And on the worlds that remained free, humanity was preparing for a fight that would last generations if necessary. Dr. Marcus Webb had been a xenobiologist before the war. He had spent his life studying alien life forms, writing papers that nobody read, and dreaming of peaceful contact with other species. Now he led one of the largest resistance cells on Titan Station, coordinating attacks that kept the Verith occupation force in a constant state of fear. He stood in a hidden chamber, deep beneath the station's surface, surrounded by men and women who had once been teachers, engineers, doctors, and farmers. They had become soldiers because there was no other choice. The Virath want our fuel refineries, Marcus said, pointing to a crude map drawn on the wall. They need them to support their fleet. Without fuel, their ships cannot stay in this system. A young woman named Sarah spoke up. Then, we destroy the refineries. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes, we destroy everything they want. We poison what we cannot destroy. We make this station worthless to them. An old man in the corner shook his head. But those refineries keep us alive too. Without them, we will freeze and starve. Marcus looked at him with tired eyes. I know, but our grandchildren will be free, or they will not exist at all. There is no middle ground here. The Virath will not leave us alone if we cooperate. They will take everything anyway and turn our children into slaves. So we burn it all down. We leave them nothing but ashes. It was an old Earth strategy. Scorched Earth, they called it. If you could not keep something, you made sure your enemy could not have it either. The logic was terrible, but it was also undeniable. The attacks began that night, far from Titan Station. In the cold darkness between stars, Captain Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the ISS Defiant and watched another Virath supply convoy appear on her sensors. Her ship should not still be flying. It had been damaged in the first week of the war, cut off from any port that could repair it. Half the systems were held together with improvised repairs and desperate prayers, but the Defiant was still fighting. 12 transport ships, her sensor officer reported. 6 escorts, Light cruisers. Yuki studied the display. Her ship could not win a straight fight against 6 cruisers, but she was not planning a straight fight. We wait until they enter the asteroid field, she said. Then we hit the transports and run. The cruisers will not be able to follow us through the rocks. Her crew had done this before. They had become ghosts, appearing from nowhere, striking hard and vanishing before the enemy could respond. The Vareth had learned to fear the Defiant. They did not know it was just one damaged ship crewed by exhausted humans who had not slept properly in months. 3 hours later, the attack was over. 4 transports destroyed, 2 more badly damaged. The cruisers had tried to pursue, but the Defiant had slipped away into an asteroid cluster where their larger ships could not. Follow YUKI allowed herself a small smile as her ship limped toward its next hiding spot. A communication arrived from a Wrath commander, offering them terms of surrender. It was the 43rd such offer they had received. Yuki responded the same way she always did. "We are not trapped out here with you," she said into the recording. "You are trapped out here with us." On the Wraith homeworld, Executor Colvin studied the latest reports from the front and felt something he had never felt before in his long military career. Doubt the war was supposed to be over by now? His analysts had predicted complete victory within 2 months. Instead, 6 months had passed, and he was losing soldiers faster than he could replace them. The human worlds he had conquered were ungovernable. The human ships he had failed to destroy were becoming legends. And worst of all, other species in the galaxy were starting to take notice. An advisor approached him with a data tablet containing historical records. Colvin had ordered a complete study of human warfare, hoping to find some weaknesses he could exploit. What he found instead filled him with a cold unease. The records stretched back thousands of years. Humans fighting each other mostly, but always with the same pattern. They did not surrender easily. They did not accept defeat gracefully. When pushed to the edge, they pushed back with a fury that defied all logic. There were stories of human cities that chose destruction rather than occupation. Stories of small groups holding against impossible odds. Stories of resistance movements that lasted for decades, passed down from parent to child, never forgotten, never forgiven. One phrase appeared again and again in the records, translated from dozens of human languages. "Give me liberty or give me death." It seemed to be a core part of their nature, something built into them at a level deeper than thought. Calvin called for a captured human prisoner to be brought before him. The human was a young male, barely more than a child by their standards. He had been taken during a raid on a resistance hideout. His arms were bound, his face was bruised, but his eyes met Calvin's without fear. "Why do you not surrender?" Kelvin asked. "You cannot win. Your species is primitive. Your worlds are falling. Continuing to fight only brings more death." The human was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was steady. "My grandmother told me stories about Earth," he said. "About all the times humans faced enemies who seemed unbeatable. Empires that covered continents. Armies that numbered in the millions. Every time people said there was no hope. Every time people said they should just give up and accept their fate." He leaned forward slightly, despite his restraints. But they did not give up. They kept fighting. Sometimes they lost. Sometimes everyone died. But sometimes they won. And even when they lost, they made the winners pay such a price that no one wanted to try again. His eyes locked onto Calvina's compound gaze. "You ask why we do not surrender. I ask you this. Can you kill every human in the galaxy? Every man, woman, and child? Because that is what it will take. And even if you do, our ghosts will remember. Somewhere, somehow, there will be someone who knows what you did, and they will never stop trying to make you pay for it." Colvin had the prisoner taken away. He sat alone in his command chamber for a long time afterward, thinking about what he had heard. The Solari had warned him. Ambassador Torvin had tried to explain, but Calvin had not understood. He had thought humans were just another species, a little more stubborn than most. But still bound by the same logic that governed all living things, he was beginning to realize that he had been wrong. Humans were not logical. They were not practical. They did not calculate the odds and make the sensible choice. They made the choice that let them look at themselves in the mirror. They made the choice that let them face their children without shame, and they would keep making that choice until there were no more humans left to make it. Calvin stared at the star map on his wall, at the tiny cluster of worlds where humanity made its stand, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if victory was truly possible. Even if he killed them all, would it really be winning? Or would it just be the beginning of something worse? 2 years had passed since the first Wrath ship entered human space. By every measurable standard, the Dominion was winning. They had conquered more worlds. They had destroyed more ships. They had killed more soldiers. Their flag flew over a dozen human colonies. But something was wrong. The Varath economy was beginning to crack under the weight of the war. Occupying human worlds required 10 times more soldiers than occupying any other species. Supply lines that should have been safe were constantly attacked. Equipment that should have lasted years was being destroyed in months. And the psychological toll on Varath's soldiers was becoming impossible to ignore. They called it the long stare. Soldiers who had served too long on human worlds would develop a distant look in their eyes. They would stop sleeping properly. They would flinch at shadows and check corners obsessively. Some simply stopped functioning, sitting motionless until they starved or were evacuated. The Varath had been bred for war for thousands of generations. They were supposed to be immune to fear, but human resistance was not like any war they had fought before. There were no front lines, no safe zones, no moments of peace. Every shadow could hide an attacker. Every friendly gesture could be a trap. Every moment of silence could be the calm before an explosion. On the occupied colony of Meridian, a Varath garrison commander filed a report that was never meant to reach the homeworld. He wrote about how his soldiers were afraid to leave their barracks, how the humans they had conquered would smile and cooperate during the day, then attack at night. How children no older than 8 years would deliver bombs hidden in food packages. How elderly humans who could barely walk would throw themselves onto patrol vehicles with explosives strapped to their bodies. "We control nothing," the commander wrote. "We hold buildings, but we do not hold the people. They hate us with a depth I cannot describe, and they are patient. They will wait years, decades, generations if necessary. They tell their children stories about us. They teach them to remember. They make us into monsters in their tales." The report ended with a simple statement: "I do not know how to defeat an enemy that considers death a victory." In the Galactic Conclave, the mood was shifting. Species that had watched silently as the Varath began their conquest were now whispering among themselves. Some were impressed by human resistance. Others were afraid of what it meant. If humans could tie down the mighty Wraith Dominion for 2 years, what did that say about the nature of power in the galaxy? Ambassador Torvin watched it all with tired eyes. He had tried to warn them. No one had listened. Now the consequences were unfolding exactly as he had predicted. He requested a private audience with Executor Kelvin. The meeting took place on a neutral station, far from prying eyes. Calvin arrived looking older than Torvin remembered. The Executor's exoskeleton had lost some of its shine. His movements were slower, heavier, as if he carried an invisible weight on his back. Torvin did not gloat. He had no desire to. There was no pleasure in watching another being make the same mistakes he had made centuries ago. "I came to show you something," Torvin said, producing a data crystal. "These are classified records from the Solari archives. They document what happened after our war with the humans officially ended." Calvin took the crystal and examined its contents. His compound eyes flickered as he processed the information. The records told a story of 30 years of quiet terror. Human ships, acting without official orders, hunting Solari vessels in deep space. Human agents infiltrating Solari worlds and sabotaging critical infrastructure. Assassinations of military officers, government officials, anyone who had played a role in the war. Not coordinated attacks. But individual acts of revenge carried out by humans who had made it their life's purpose to make the Solari pay? They did not do this because their government ordered it, Torvin explained. They did it because they could not stop themselves. The humans who lost family on Aurelia 7 could not simply move on with their lives. They needed justice, or what they called justice. And when they could not get it through official channels, they took it themselves. Calvin set down the crystal. How did you stop it? We did not stop it, Torvin said simply. We waited for those humans to grow old and die. And we made peace with the next generation before they could inherit the hatred of their parents. It took decades. It cost us more than the war itself. And even now, there are humans who have not forgotten. They watch us. They remember. The old ambassador leaned forward. You do not understand what you have awakened, he said. Humans have a concept called generational memory. They pass their wounds down from parent to child like precious treasures. Their grandchildren will still be fighting this war when your grandchildren have forgotten why it started. You can win every battle from now until the stars burn out, and you will still lose. Because humans measure victory differently than we do. Calvin was silent for a long time. On Earth, Admiral James Okonkwo stood before a room full of military commanders and political leaders. The planet had been fortified beyond recognition. Every city had become a fortress. Every citizen had become a soldier. And now, after 2 years of defense, it was time to strike back. Operation Homecoming, Okonkwo announced, displaying a star map on the main screen. We are going to take the fight to them. Murmurs rippled through the room. Earth's remaining fleet was small compared to what the Verith could field. An offensive seemed like suicide, but Okonkwo explained his plan with the calm confidence of a man who had thought about nothing else for months. We cannot win a conventional war, he admitted. We do not have the ships or the soldiers. But we do not need to win a conventional war. We need to show the galaxy that humans can strike back. We need to show the Verith that their own territory is not safe. We need to plant a seed of doubt that will grow until they can no longer ignore it. The fleet would be crewed by volunteers who understood that most of them would not return. Their mission was not to destroy the Reth military. It was to hit targets that mattered to the Verith spirit. Cultural sites, historical monuments, sacred temples, things that could not be replaced. They have tried to break our spirit, Okonkwo said. Now we break theirs. We show them that nothing they love is beyond our reach. We make them understand that this war will never truly end. Not until they leave us alone. The operation launched 3 weeks later. 17 human ships slipped through Vereth defenses and struck at the heart of their empire. They hit the Temple of First Ascension, a monument older than human civilization. They hit the Memorial of Fallen Heroes, where the names of every Wraith soldier who had died in service were carved in eternal stone. They hit the Imperial Archive, where the history of the Dominion was kept safe for future generations. Executor. Colvin watched his empire's most sacred places burn and felt something he had never felt before. Not anger, not even grief, fear. Because now, he understood what Torvin had tried to tell him. The humans were not trying to win the war. They were trying to ensure that even if they lost, the Vrath would gain nothing worth having. They would burn the galaxy down before they would kneel, and there was nothing in the universe that could stop them. The war ended not with a final battle, not with a dramatic victory, but with a quiet announcement that shocked the galaxy. Executor Colvin stood before the Galactic Conclave and did something that no Varath leader had done in 10,000 years of. Recorded history, he offered terms not to demand human surrender. To request an armistice, the chamber fell into stunned silence. The Varath Dominion did not ask for peace. They dictated terms to defeated enemies. They accepted tribute from conquered species. They did not negotiate with primitives, who should have been crushed in a matter of weeks. But Calvin stood tall before the assembled delegates and spoke, words that would be remembered for centuries. Dominion has decided to end military operations against humanity, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ancient hall. We will withdraw from all occupied human worlds. We will return all prisoners of war. We will pay reparations for damage caused during the conflict. In exchange, we ask only that humans cease hostilities against Dominion territory and personnel. A ripple of disbelief spread through the conclave. The Varath were surrendering. Not officially, not in those words, but that was what it meant. They were giving back everything they had taken and asking for nothing in return, except an end to the fighting. One delegate found the courage to ask the question on everyone's mind. Why? Calvin turned to face the speaker. For a long moment, he did not answer. Then he spoke, and his words were heavy with exhaustion and hard-won understanding. Because we cannot win, he said simply. We can kill humans. We can destroy their worlds. We can reduce their civilization to rubble and ash. But we cannot make them surrender. We cannot make them submit. We cannot make them stop fighting. And as long as they keep fighting, we keep losing. He looked around the chamber at the 1,000 species who had gathered to witness this moment. We've lost more soldiers in 3 years of war against humanity than we lost in the previous 200 years of conquest combined. Our economy is strained to its breaking point. Our soldiers are damaged in ways that cannot be healed. Our people are beginning to question whether any victory is worth this cost. His compound eyes found Ambassador Torvin in the crowd. The Solari tried to warn me. I did not listen. I thought humans were like every other species we had conquered. I thought that sufficient force would make them see reason. I was wrong. He straightened, and there was something almost like respect in his voice. Humans do not measure victory the way we do. They do not calculate costs and benefits the way we do. They have something inside them that I do not fully understand. Something that makes them willing to sacrifice everything for ideas that have no physical form. Freedom, dignity, honor. These are just words to most species. To humans, they are more valuable than life itself. The terms were accepted. The war officially ended, and the galaxy began the long process of understanding what had just happened. The signing ceremony took place on a neutral station, with representatives from both sides and observers from a dozen other species. Executor Colvin arrived with a small delegation, unarmed and unarmored. Admiral James Okonkwo came from the human side, wearing a dress uniform that could not hide the scars he'd earned in 3 years of brutal warfare. The two leaders faced each other across a simple table. Behind them, their respective peoples watched through screens and sensors. Witnessing history being made, Colvin studied the human admiral. Okonkwo was older than when the war began. His hair had gone gray. He walked with a limp from a wound that had never fully healed. His left arm was gone, replaced by a simple prosthetic. But his eyes were clear and steady, and there was no hatred in them. You could have kept fighting, Kelvin observed. Your people would have followed you to the end. Okonkwo nodded slowly. Yes, they would have. Then why agree to peace? You had not yet lost. The admiral was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. We do not want to die, he finally said. We want to live. We want to raise our children in safety and grow old in peace. We want to build things instead of destroying them. War is not our purpose. It is just something we do when we have no other choice. He met Colvin's gaze directly. You gave us another choice. You offered fair terms and genuine peace. We are not fools. We know the value of that offer. And we are not so proud that we would refuse it just to prove a point. Colvin considered this. But if we had not offered terms, if we had kept fighting, Okonkwo's expression did not change. Then we would have kept fighting too. Until the last human was dead. Until the last Vareth was dead. Until there was nothing left but empty space and silent stars. He paused. We did not start this war. We did not want this war. But we were prepared to finish it, no matter what that cost. That is who we are. That is what you should remember. The documents were signed. The war was over. 50 years passed. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Varath Dominion still existed, still powerful, but they had not attempted another conquest. The memory of humanity was too fresh, too painful. Other species had noticed. humans had become one of the most sought-after allies in the galaxy. Not because they were the strongest or the most advanced, because they were the most reliable. When humanity made a promise, they kept it. When humanity made a threat, they meant it. And when humanity called someone a friend, they would fight for that friend until the stars went cold. Ambassador Torvin, ancient beyond measure, gave his final address to the Galactic Conclave before retiring from public life. He spoke of the long centuries he had witnessed, the empires that had risen and fallen, the lessons that had been learned and forgotten and learned again. But mostly, he spoke of humanity. We asked ourselves for centuries what made them different, he said. His voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly through the silent chamber. We thought it was their aggression, their intelligence, their adaptability. We were wrong about all of it. He paused, gathering his strength for his final words. What makes humans special is their faith. Not faith in gods or supernatural powers. Faith in each other. Faith in the idea that no matter how dark the night becomes, someone will keep the fire burning until dawn. They believe that the future can be better than the past. They believe that sacrifice today can create freedom tomorrow. They believe these things so deeply that they will die for them without hesitation. His eyes swept across the assembled delegates. That is why they cannot be conquered. That is why they cannot be broken. Because even when you destroy their bodies, you cannot destroy their ideas. And ideas, my friends, are immortal. On Earth, life had returned to something like normal. Cities had been rebuilt. Families had been reunited. Children who had been born during the war were now growing up in a world that their parents had fought and bled to create. In Geneva, where the peace treaty had been ratified, a monument stood in a quiet park. It was a simple thing, just a wall of black stone with names carved into its surface. Millions of names. Every human who had died in the war, children played in the shadow of that wall, laughing and running as children do everywhere in the universe. They did not fully understand what the names represented. They were too young, but their parents and grandparents remembered. And when those children grew old enough to ask questions, the stories would be told again at the base of the wall. An inscription had been carved in letters large enough to be read from far away. It said simply, "They told us to surrender. We told them to wait." Visitors from other worlds sometimes came to see the monument. They would stand before that wall of names and try to understand what they were seeing. Some of them would ask the humans nearby what the inscription meant. The answer was always the same, delivered with a quiet smile that held centuries of memory. It means that we are still here. And we always will be. The galaxy stretched out around them, vast and mysterious and full of dangers that no one could predict.